So you want to know if revenge is really a dish best served cold? Let me tell you, sometimes it's not served cold. Sometimes it's served in perfect four-part harmony, under the warm glow of stage lights right before the whole world gets to watch a man's life crumble into dust. And sometimes you're the one holding the pitch pipe. My name is Philip, and for the longest time my wife Linda thought I was just an old song, long forgotten. She was about to learn that some melodies are timeless and some are deadly. It all started, or maybe it just culminated, with the Barbershop Quartet. Every Tuesday night I'd put on my old tweed jacket, grab my music folder, and head over to Gus's workshop. To Linda, this was the peak of my pathetic, old-fashioned existence. She'd watch me from the kitchen, a look of exquisite pity on her face, the kind you'd give a dog that can't learn a new trick. "Have fun with your little singing group, dear," she'd say, the words dripping with a condescension so thick you could bottle it. "Try not to strain yourself." She saw four old men, me, Gus, Walter, and Sam, shuffling into a dusty garage to sing saccharine tunes from a bygone era. She imagined us crooning about My Wild Irish Rose while sipping lukewarm lemonade, our voices cracking on the high notes. In her mind, I was a relic, a man whose passions were as faded as the photographs on our mantelpiece, a harmless, predictable, and utterly boring husband. And that perception, that complete and total underestimation, was her greatest mistake. It became my greatest weapon. Our marriage hadn't always been a cold war fought across a king-sized bed. I remember the early days, the easy laughter, the way she'd look at me like I'd hung the moon. We built a life together, a comfortable one. I worked a steady, if unspectacular, job in logistics management for a major shipping firm. I planned routes, managed inventories, and made sure things got where they needed to go, on time and under budget. It was a job that required precision, foresight, and an obsessive attention to detail. Linda used to admire that. She called it my superpower. Then somewhere along the line, precise became rigid, foresighted became boring, and my quiet competence became a liability in the face of the glittering, fast-paced world she desperately wanted to join. Her gateway to that world was Councilman Marcus Thorne. He was everything I wasn't: flashy, silver-tongued, and perpetually bathed in the glow of local news cameras. He was the future, she told me once, not in so many words, but with a dismissive wave of her hand towards my collection of vintage jazz records. I was the past. Their affair wasn't some sordid, hidden secret. It was a public spectacle, a feature in the city's social life. They were photographed at charity galas, their heads close together in conspiratorial laughter. They were spotted at the trendiest new restaurants, sharing a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Linda didn't even bother to hide it. She flaunted it. It was a power move, a declaration that she had outgrown me and our quiet life. She was with a man of consequence now, and I was just the quaint, embarrassing husband she hadn't gotten around to divorcing yet. She was sure I wouldn't do anything. What could I do? I was just Philip, the guy who sings Barbershop on Tuesdays. The inciting incident, the moment the last thread of hope snapped, wasn't a photograph or a whispered rumor. It was a Tuesday night. I was getting ready to leave, knotting my favorite woolen tie. Linda was preening in front of the hall mirror, adjusting a silk scarf around her neck. She was heading out too, of course, to a fundraiser with Marcus. She looked at me, at my tweed jacket and my worn leather music case, and she laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp and brittle. "You know, Philip," she said, turning back to her reflection, "Marcus was asking about you the other day." I felt a familiar clenching in my gut. "Oh, yes, he asked what you do for fun. I told him you sing in a barbershop quartet." She paused, then met my eyes in the mirror. Her own were cold, amused. "He actually felt sorry for me," he said. "My God, Linda, you must be bored to tears." She said it with such casual cruelty, as if she were commenting on the weather, as if my heart wasn't a living, beating thing in my chest. She thought my hobby was a joke. She thought my friends were a punchline. She thought I was a fossil, and in that moment, looking at the smug satisfaction on her face, I felt a calm settle over me that was so profound, so absolute, it was almost terrifying. She had no idea who she was married to. She had no idea what my little singing group really was. We didn't just harmonize, we gathered information, we analyzed threats, we neutralized them, and we had just spent the last 6 months building a comprehensive file on the entire criminal enterprise that was Councilman Marcus Thorne, the bribery, the kickbacks, the shell corporations. We had it all, and we were planning to leak it during his big re-election speech. Tomorrow, well, I said, giving my tie a final firm tug. We all have our ways of dealing with boredom. I picked up my music case, the weight of it feeling different tonight, heavier, more substantial. You have a good time with the councilman, dear. She just smirked, a final little twist of the knife. Oh, I always do. As I walked out the door into the cool night air, the gentle click of the lock behind me sounded like the arming of a bomb. Linda and her councilman thought this was a social comedy, and I was the bumbling fool. They were about to find out they were in a completely different kind of story, and I was the one writing the ending. It wasn't about saving my marriage anymore. It wasn't even about pride. It was about balance. It was about proving that the quietest men often have the most to say, and that sometimes the most devastating weapon is the one your enemy never ever sees coming. The drive to Gus's workshop was a study in controlled fury. The streetlights blurred past, each one a flash of insight into the years of quiet erosion. Every little jab from Linda, every dismissive sigh every time she'd chosen her new glittering friends over a quiet evening with me, it all coalesced into a single hard point of light in my mind. Clarity. It's a strange thing, what the heart can endure. You think it's a fragile organ, but it's more like a piece of metal. You can bend it, and bend it, and bend it for years. It gets weaker, sure, but it holds its shape. But there's always a breaking point, a point where the metal doesn't just bend, it snaps. And when it snaps, the edge is razor sharp. Linda's words about Marcus Thorne feeling sorry for her, that was the snap. It wasn't just the insult to me, it was the sheer breathtaking arrogance of it. They saw me as a caricature, a harmless buffoon in a straw boater hat. They had built their entire illicit little world on the foundation of my perceived weakness. My patience, which was once a cornerstone of our marriage, had been reinterpreted as cowardice. My love of tradition, which she once found endearing, was now proof of my irrelevance. I parked in my usual spot behind the workshop, the crunch of gravel under the tires, the only sound in the alley. Gus's place was an old brick building that used to be a small-scale furniture manufactory. Now the ground floor was his legitimate business. He was a master carpenter and restorer of antiques. But the real work happened in the basement, a basement that was a fully equipped, soundproofed, lead-lined Faraday cage. Our sanctuary, our clubhouse, our command center. My mind drifted back, sorting through memories like a detective sifting through evidence at a crime scene. I remembered our 20th anniversary. I had spent a month planning a surprise trip to a little inn on the coast where we'd honeymooned. I'd booked the same room, talked to the chef about recreating our first dinner there. I was bursting with it, waiting for the perfect moment to tell her. I came home from work early that day, a travel brochure tucked in my briefcase. I found her in the living room, on the phone, laughing. "Oh, you have to come," she'd chirped into the receiver. "Everyone will be there. Marcus is giving the keynote." She saw me standing in the doorway, and her face tightened for just a fraction of a second before the smooth social mask slipped back on. "Philip just walked in," she said, her voice dropping a register. "I'll have to call you back." She hung up and gave me a brilliant false smile. "Hi, honey, tough day. I have something for you," I said, my own excitement feeling foolish and clumsy in the face of her cool composure. I handed her the brochure. She glanced at it, her eyebrows raising slightly. "Oh, the Salty Dog Inn. How quaint." She tossed the brochure onto the coffee table like it was a takeout menu. "That's sweet, Philip, but I can't possibly get away that weekend. It's the Children's Hospital Gala. It's the biggest event of the season. Marcus is being honored. I have to be there. There was no discussion. No let me see if I can move things around. Just a flat dismissal. The gala was more important. Marcus was more important. My gesture, a piece of my heart offered up in a glossy pamphlet, was swept aside without a second thought. I canceled the reservation the next day, the shame burning in my throat. I told her I'd made a mistake with the dates. She just nodded. Already distracted by a text message lighting up her phone, I started to see it then. It wasn't just that her priorities were shifting. It was that I was no longer one of them. And the quartet. God, the quartet. The first time she mocked it, it was almost playful. We had friends over, a new couple she was trying to impress. The husband was a hedge fund manager who talked about his polo hobby. His wife ran an art gallery. I mentioned that my big excitement for the week was mastering the tenor part for Coney Island Baby. Linda laughed, a light tinkling sound, and patted my arm. "Oh, Philip and his boys," she said to the room. "They're determined to keep the 1920s alive, one silly song at a time." The hedge fund manager chuckled politely. I felt my face flush. It was a small thing, a pinprick. But pinpricks, repeated over time, can bleed a man dry. Soon, the playful jabs became open scorn. She stopped asking about my Tuesday nights. If I tried to tell her about a breakthrough we'd had, a chord that finally locked into place with that perfect ringing overtone, her eyes would glaze over. "That's nice, dear," she'd murmur, her attention already back on her phone, scrolling through pictures of galas and parties I was never invited to. I remembered the night I knew for sure about the affair. It wasn't one thing but a dozen small sharp-edged clues. The way she guarded her phone, the late-night meetings that left her smelling of a man's cologne I didn't own, the credit card bill with a charge for a hotel bar across town on a Wednesday afternoon. I didn't confront her. What was the point? The trust was already a shattered thing on the floor between us. Confrontation would just be sweeping up the pieces. So I stayed quiet. I watched, and I started listening more closely during my own meetings. I pushed the memories down as I walked to the heavy steel door at the side of Gus's building. I keyed in the code, a sequence based on the prime numbers in the birth date of a long-dead KGB handler we'd all had the misfortune of dealing with back in the day. The lock gave a satisfying thud. Inside, the smell of sawdust and varnish filled the air. But as I descended the wooden stairs to the basement, the scent changed. It became the clean, cool, sterile smell of electronics and ozone. I reached the bottom and opened the second door, a bank vault-like behemoth Gus had salvaged from a decommissioned embassy. The muffled sound of four-part harmony washed over me. They had started without me. Down by the old mill stream, Gus, Walter, and Sam were standing in their usual formation around a vintage condenser microphone. Gus, a mountain of a man with a booming bass voice and hands that could crush walnuts or repair a microchip with equal dexterity. Walter, small and bird-like, peering over his spectacles, his high, clear tenor, the backbone of our sound. And Sam, leaning back with effortless cool, his smooth baritone the honey that blended everything together. They looked up as I entered. The singing stopped. "Philip," Gus said, his deep voice rumbling, "you're late, and you have the look." He called it the look. It was a stillness, a focus I got when a plan was moving from theoretical to operational. They'd all seen it before, in other lives, in other, more dangerous places. "Evening, boys," I said, setting my music case on the central workbench. I didn't open it. "Change of tune tonight." Walter adjusted his glasses. "Is this about Linda?" he asked softly. He was always the most perceptive, the one who saw the emotional data as clearly as the encrypted signals he used to pluck from the ether for the NSA. "It's about everything," I said. I looked at each of them in turn. These were the only men on earth who knew me. Not the old-fashioned Philip my wife saw, but the man I used to be. The man I still was, underneath it all. I was never a field agent like Sam or Gus. My role had been different. I was an analyst, a planner, a strategist. My job was to see the whole board, to anticipate the enemy's moves, and to position our assets for maximum effect. I was the architect of victory. Linda told me tonight that her boyfriend, Councilman Thorne, feels sorry for her because her husband is in a barbershop quartet. I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion churning inside me. A heavy silence filled the room. Sam, usually so relaxed, straightened up. Gus's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He had his own reasons for despising Thorne, a detail that made this operation all the sweeter. That man, Gus growled, the bass in his voice dropping to a subterranean level, is a piece of filth. Yes, he is. I agreed, and we have a comprehensive multi-source file detailing exactly what kind of filth he is. The question has always been when and how to deploy it. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. The timeline has been moved up. The operation is green. We go tomorrow night. During his re-election speech, Walter's eyes widened slightly. Tomorrow. Philip, the delivery system isn't fully tested. The data packet is huge, pushing it to all media outlets simultaneously, while also hijacking the live feed at the venue. There are risks. I'm aware of the risks, Walter, I said. I finally opened my music case, but instead of sheet music, I pulled out a slim, hardened laptop and a set of schematic diagrams. That's why we're going to spend tonight wargaming every possible contingency. His speech is at 7 p.m. at the Grand Civic Auditorium. By 7:15, his career will be incinerated. Linda will be in the front row to watch the show. A slow, grim smile spread across Sam's face. It's not just about revenge, is it, Philip? He asked, a knowing glint in his eye. I looked at the schematics under the harsh light of the workshop. The plan was intricate, beautiful in its own destructive way, a symphony of chaos. I thought of Linda's mocking laugh, of Thorne's pity. I thought of all the years I had swallowed my pride, all the times I had chosen peace over confrontation. I had been a quiet man, a patient man, but they had mistaken my patience for weakness. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. No, Sam, I said, my voice steady and cold. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. The quartet, as Linda so dismissively called it, was born out of necessity and boredom about a decade ago. Retirement is a strange beast for men like us. For 30-plus years, your life is a whirlwind of secrets and high stakes, of purpose so profound it becomes the very air you breathe. Then, one day, it stops. You're given a pension, a firm handshake, and a warning to never speak of what you did. You're cast out into the civilian world, a world that suddenly seems painfully slow and naive. The silence is deafening. I met Gus first. I'd taken an old mahogany writing desk, a family heirloom, to his shop for restoration. He was sanding a chair leg, his massive hands moving with a surgeon's grace. We got to talking. It's a funny thing, you develop a sort of sixth sense in the intelligence community, an ability to recognize your own kind. It's in the way a man watches a room, the economy of his movements, the careful, measured cadence of his speech. We danced around the subject for an hour, talking about government work and overseas contracts. Finally, I mentioned a particularly nasty incident in Budapest in '88, involving a compromised safe house and a particularly inventive use of a goulash recipe. His eyes lit up with recognition. He'd been the one to wire the place. After that, the pretense fell away. It turned out Gus had been a legend in Mossad's Katsa division. He was a technology and demolitions man, a specialist in energetic entry and bespoke surveillance devices. He could build a bomb out of a toaster or a listening device that looked like a speck of dust. He retired to our quiet city to be closer to his daughter and her family, channeling his incredible focus into the patient art of woodworking. But the itch was still there. Gus introduced me to Sam. Sam was British, ex-MI6. He was the classic field agent, charming, handsome, even in his 60s, with a disarming smile that had coaxed secrets out of diplomats and warlords alike. He was a master of social engineering, of becoming whoever he needed to be to get what he wanted. He'd retired here after a mission in South America went sideways, leaving him with a slight limp and a deep-seated distrust of institutional bureaucracy. He ran a small high-end security consultancy for corporate clients, a job that was for him painfully dull. It was Sam who found Walter. Walter had been a ghost, a cryptanalyst for the NSA. He'd spent his entire career in a windowless room at Fort Meade, staring at streams of code, pulling actionable intelligence from the digital noise of the world. He was a genius, a man who saw the world in patterns and algorithms. When the digital world surpassed the analog one, Walter became one of the most powerful men nobody had ever heard of. He burned out, cashing in his pension and moving to a quiet town where the only code he had to crack was the daily crossword. He was lonely, adrift in a sea of analog quiet. We started meeting for coffee. It was a relief, being able to talk without censoring every other word. We shared war stories, bitched about our pensions, and lamented the lack of a decent challenge. The idea for the quartet was a joke at first, Sam's idea. "We need a cover, chaps," he'd said in his dry British accent. Something so utterly mundane, so profoundly boring, no one would ever look twice. "What's the most harmless activity for four old men?" "Bingo," Gus had rumbled. "Bird watching." Walter had whispered. "A barbershop quartet," I'd offered. And it was perfect. The name, the harmonics, was my little contribution. It was a nod to the resonant frequencies Gus used in his listening devices, and the harmonic patterns Walter looked for in code. It was an inside joke for an audience of four. We actually learned to sing. Gus's soundproofed basement was the perfect rehearsal space. We weren't terrible. My background in logistics and planning translated surprisingly well to musical arrangement, and we found a strange satisfaction in locking our voices into a perfect ringing chord. But the singing was always secondary. The real purpose of our meetings was to keep the gears from rusting. We'd pick a target, a local politician, a corporation, a minor celebrity, and we'd build a file. It was an exercise, a game. We'd use our old skills to dig up information, just to see if we still could. Gus would do some light surveillance. Walter would mine public records and the deep web. Sam would do a bit of social reconnaissance. My job was to collate the data, to weave the disparate threads into a coherent tapestry, to write the final report. We never did anything with the information. The game was the point, until Councilman Marcus Thorne. We chose Thorne as a target about a year ago. He was a rising star, full of charisma and big promises, but he felt wrong. His rise was too fast, his rhetoric too slick. He was a puzzle, and we decided to solve him. What started as a routine exercise quickly turned serious. Walter was the first to find the real dirt. "It's here," he'd said, one Tuesday night, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. He was quieter than usual, a sign that he'd found something significant. "It's a shell game, a string of LLCs, registered in Delaware, all leading back to a single holding company in the Cayman Islands. The money trail is obscene." That's when Gus's personal stake came into focus. Gus's son David had owned a small beloved cafe downtown. It was his life's dream. But a year and a half ago, a massive new luxury condo development was approved by the city council in a controversial fast-tracked vote. The development bought up the whole block, forcing out all the small businesses. David's cafe was one of them. He was financially ruined, his spirit broken. The deciding vote, the man who had championed the project and pushed it through against fierce community opposition, was Marcus Thorne. Walter's data proved what Gus had long suspected. The developer behind the condo project was a man named Peterson, and Peterson's company had made 3 large untraceable payments to the Cayman Islands holding company just weeks before the council vote. It was a direct, provable bribe. Thorne had sold out an entire community, destroyed lives and livelihoods, including that of Gus's son, for a briefcase full of cash. Suddenly, our game wasn't a game anymore. It became a mission. Gus's fury gave it weight. His pain gave it purpose. He wanted justice for his son. I wanted, well, at the time, I just wanted to help my friend. My own marital problems were a separate smoldering fire. I hadn't yet realized that the two fires were about to merge into a single raging inferno. Over the next 6 months, we escalated the operation. This was no longer just about public records. Sam, in his role as a security consultant, got a meeting with Thorne's ambitious but underpaid chief of staff. Plying him with compliments and the promise of a lucrative private sector job, Sam managed to get him to talk about the councilman's lax digital security. A few days later, Sam accidentally left a high-end fountain pen on the man's desk after a follow-up meeting. The pen, a custom job by Gus, contained a tiny key-logging transmitter. Gus, meanwhile, went to work on the restaurant where Thorne held his most sensitive meetings. Posing as a fire inspector, he spent an hour in the private back room checking the sprinkler system. When he left, the center rose in the floral arrangement on the table was no longer a real flower. It was a perfect silk replica containing a high-fidelity, laser-activated microphone and a pinhole camera. My role was to be the hub. I took the raw data, Walter's financial traces, the keystroke logs from Sam's pen, the audio and video from Gus's flower, and I began to build the narrative. It was a sordid story of greed and corruption, more extensive than we could have imagined. It wasn't just the one bribe, it was a dozen. Zoning variances, city contracts, appointments to commissions. Everything was for sale. Thorne wasn't just a corrupt politician. He was the head of a criminal enterprise, disguised as a city government. We compiled everything into a single encrypted digital dossier. It had bank records, video evidence, audio recordings, and a detailed flowchart I'd created that connected every player, every bribe, every illegal transaction. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of destruction, and I just sat on it. For weeks, the others were getting anxious. Gus, in particular, was champing at the bit. When Philip, he'd ask every Tuesday, "When do we burn him to the ground?" "Patience, Gus," I'd say. "The timing has to be perfect, maximum impact. We only get one shot at this." But the truth was, I was hesitant. Part of me, a foolish, sentimental part, was still clinging to the wreckage of my marriage. Exposing Thorne would mean exposing Linda. It would mean public humiliation for her, a scandal she would be forever tied to. Could I do that to the woman I had once loved? The mother of, well, we never had children. That had been another point of contention, another dream that had withered on the vine. Maybe that was for the best. So I waited. I equivocated. I told myself I was being strategic, but I was just being a coward. Then came tonight. Then came Linda's casual, brutal comment. He actually felt sorry for me, and in that moment, all my hesitation evaporated. All my sentimental foolishness burned away, leaving behind something hard and cold and clear. She hadn't just chosen him over me. She had joined him in his contempt for me. They were partners, not just in adultery, but in their shared belief that I was a nobody, a joke. Walking into that basement, seeing the faces of my friends, the only people who saw me for who I truly was, I knew the time for waiting was over. The perfect moment wasn't some abstract strategic calculation. It was now. It was tomorrow night. "Walter," I said, turning to the small, brilliant man hunched over his laptop, "forget the risks. I want you to focus on the delivery. I don't just want this leaked to the press. I want it on the main screens in that auditorium. I want every person in that room, every supporter, every donor, and especially my wife, to see the unvarnished truth of who Marcus Thorne really is, broadcast in high definition." Walter looked up, a rare, fierce light in his eyes. "The AV system for the auditorium is run by a third-party contractor. Their security protocols are a joke. I can get in. I can create a back door, but it will be a one-way trip. Once we push the data, they'll know they've been hacked. They'll trace it back to our entry point. They can trace it to a dead end," Gus rumbled, patting a small, innocuous-looking gray box on the workbench. "A series of cascading proxy servers routed through a burner node in Moldova, which will physically melt its own circuits 2 seconds after the data is sent. They'll find nothing." "Good," I said. "Sam, your job is the simplest and the hardest. I want you to be in the audience tomorrow night, near the front. I need a pair of eyes on Linda. I want to know the exact moment she understands what's happening." Sam gave me a wolfish grin. "A pleasure, old boy. Front row seats to the opera." "And me?" Gus asked. "You and I, Gus," I said, "will be with Sam. We'll be there as the harmonics. 4 harmless old men, out to support our local councilman." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. We need to see our work pay off in person. We need to be there for the grand finale. The rest of the night was a blur of intense, focused work. Walter's fingers flew across his keyboard, a silent symphony of code. Gus tinkered with his proxy server, muttering to himself in Hebrew. Sam practiced his doddering old fan persona in the corner, while I walked them all through the sequence of events, the timing, the contingencies. There was no more singing. The harmony we were creating now was of a different sort. It was the harmony of a perfectly executed plan, of 4 old lions who had been roused from their slumber, their purpose restored. The world had forgotten who they were. We were about to remind them. The first move in an operation like this is never the main event. The main event is the explosion. The moves you make before are about ensuring the target is standing in the exact right spot when the charge goes off. You have to seed paranoia. You have to destabilize their reality, make them question their own senses, their own security. You have to make them feel a cold draft in a locked room. We started the psychological campaign at dawn. Thorne was a man of routine, 7 a.m. A run through the manicured paths of City Park, 8:15 a.m. The same corner table at the Daily Grind coffee shop, with 2 newspapers he never actually read, 9 a.m., City Hall. We knew his rhythm better than he did, at 7:10 a.m. As he rounded the duck pond, Sam, dressed in the shabby tracksuit of a fellow early morning runner, jogged past him. As he did, Sam was on his phone, having a loud, one-sided conversation. "No, I'm telling you. The Peterson deal is solid," Sam said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp morning air. "The payments all went through the Cayman holding, clean as a whistle." I was watching from a bench 200 yards away through a pair of high-powered binoculars. I saw Thorne's stride falter. It was just for a second, a tiny hitch in his smooth, practiced gait. He glanced over his shoulder at Sam, who was already disappearing down the path, still chattering into his phone. It was a perfect shot in the dark, a name from his secret life appearing in the open. The first crack in the foundation. He wouldn't be able to shake it. Who was that man? How did he know about Peterson, about the Caymans? The questions would start to eat at him. The second move came at 8:20 a.m. At the coffee shop, Walter, from the comfort of his home office 5 miles away, executed a simple, elegant little piece of code. As Thorne paid for his coffee with a tap of his credit card, the cashier's screen flickered. A single line of text appeared for less than a second before the system rebooted. Zoning variance 4B. Approved. The cashier, a college kid with headphones on, didn't even notice, but Thorne did. I was sitting 2 tables away, hidden behind a laptop, pretending to work. I saw his eyes widen, saw him stare at the screen as it returned to normal. He asked the kid if the system was having problems. The kid just shrugged. "Happens sometimes, dude." Thorne took his coffee, but his hand was shaking slightly. Zoning variance 4B was the official designation for the Peterson condo project. Another ghost from his past whispering in his ear. The final move before the main event was Gus's masterpiece. Thorne's office at City Hall was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the plaza. Across that plaza was a new glass and steel office building. Gus had rented a small temporary office space on the same floor the day before under a fake corporate name. In that office, he had set up a device of his own invention, a parabolic sound projector. It could focus a beam of sound onto a single precise point from a great distance. It was untraceable. At 11:30 a.m., Thorne was in a meeting with his campaign manager. Right in the middle of a discussion about polling numbers, Gus aimed his device at the window of Thorne's office and whispered a single word into the microphone. Isabella. Isabella was the name of a legislative aide he'd been seeing on the side. This wasn't our information. This was something Linda had let slip in a moment of bitter complaining a few weeks back. furious that Marcus had been dividing his free time. It was a detail I had filed away for just such an occasion. From our surveillance of his office, a simple bug on his desk phone that Gus had installed months ago by posing as a technician from the phone company, we heard the result. Thorne stopped mid-sentence. "What did you say?" He snapped at his campaign manager. "What? I was just talking about the numbers in the North District." The man replied, confused. "Did you just say Isabella?" "What? No, why would I say that?" Thorne stood up and walked to the window, peering out at the plaza below as if he could see the source of the sound. He saw nothing but people walking to lunch. He was hearing things. His secrets were literally whispering to him from the air. The paranoia, which had started as a seed in the park that morning, was now a thriving, venomous weed in his mind. The best part was watching the fallout through Linda. She called me around noon. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Her voice was tight with irritation. "Philip, call me. Marcus is acting insane. He's canceling our lunch. He's ranting about conspiracies and people being after him. I swear this campaign is making him lose his mind." I almost laughed out loud. She was so close to the truth and yet so infinitely far away. She thought it was the stress of the campaign. She had no concept of an external force acting upon her perfect new life. In her world, the only variables were her, Marcus, and me, the pathetic old husband in the background. The idea that the background was suddenly moving, that it was an active participant in her drama, was beyond her comprehension. I called her back an hour later, affecting my most placid, slightly bewildered tone. "Hi dear, sorry I missed your call. I was just polishing my pitch pipe for tonight's rehearsal. Is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right," she hissed into the phone. "Marcus is a wreck. He thinks his office is bugged. He's accusing his staff of leaking things. He just yelled at me for 20 minutes because I asked him if he wanted a sandwich." "Oh dear," I said, letting just the right amount of useless sympathy into my voice. "That does sound stressful. Politics is such a tough business. I'm sure it will all blow over after the election. He'd better get it together before his speech tonight," she grumbled. "The entire donor list will be there. He needs to be charming Marcus, not this raving lunatic." "Well, I'm sure he'll be fine," I said soothingly. "You have a calming effect on him, I'm sure." She snorted, a sound of pure frustration. "Not today, I don't. He's practically accusing me of being careless." "Me? Can you believe it?" Oh, I could believe it. It was beautiful. Our silent takeover wasn't about brute force. It was about turning their own world against them. Thorne's paranoia, fueled by our carefully placed whispers, was now making him turn on the one person he thought he could trust. Their perfect illicit alliance was starting to fracture under a pressure it was never designed to withstand. He was looking for a traitor, a leak, and his suspicious eyes were landing on her. The irony was exquisite. He was right to be suspicious of his partner's spouse, but he was looking at the wrong partner. I spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet preparation. I laid out my Quartet costume, the navy blue blazer with the gold embroidered H on the pocket, the gray slacks, the crisp white shirt, the striped bow tie. It looked so innocent, so wholesome, a uniform of harmlessness. As I dressed, I thought about power. Linda and Thorne thought power was about money, influence, public perception. They were wrong. Real power isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the knowledge you hold that others don't. It's the ability to shape events without anyone knowing you're there. For years I had ceded my power in my own home, letting Linda's ambition and dissatisfaction dictate the terms of our life. I had become a ghost in my own marriage. But tonight the ghost was coming back, and he was bringing hell with him. Linda came home around 5, slamming the door behind her. She was dressed for the speech, a stunning, blood-red dress that was clearly meant to make a statement. Her face, however, was a mask of thunder. She saw me already dressed in my Quartet outfit, and her lip curled in a sneer. "Oh God, are you really wearing that?" "It's the uniform, dear," I said calmly, adjusting my bow tie. Wouldn't want to be out of tune with the others. I don't have time for your stupid jokes, Philip. My life is falling apart because Marcus has decided to become a paranoid schizophrenic and you're playing dress up with your friends. I'm sorry you're having a bad day, I said, and I truly was. I was sorry she was about to have a much, much worse one. She threw her hands up in exasperation. You're useless. You just don't get it, do you? This is important. My future is tied to this speech tonight. I'm sure it is, I said, picking up my music case. Well, I'd better be going. Big night for us too. We're performing at a retirement home benefit after our rehearsal. It was a lie, of course, but it was the perfect, pathetic little detail to complete the picture. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. A retirement home. That's perfect. That's exactly where you belong. Those were the last words she said to me before it all went down. It was, in its own way, a perfect send-off. She had placed me in a box labeled old and irrelevant. She had no idea I was the one who had built the box she was standing in and that I was about to pull the floor out from under her. I walked out of the house, leaving her there in her blood-red dress, surrounded by the ruins of a life she thought was just beginning. The final act of the power shift was not something I had planned for, but it was a gift, a beautiful, unexpected gift that simplified everything. It came in the form of Linda, arriving at my doorstep 2 hours before the speech, a suitcase in her hand. She had left her furious message and then, apparently, stewed in her own rage until it boiled over into a grand, dramatic gesture. I was at Gus's workshop with the others, running a final check on the system, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. I'm at the house. I'm leaving you. I've come to get the rest of my things. We need to talk. A thrill, cold and sharp, went through me. This was it. The confrontation I had long avoided, now happening on my terms, on my timeline. Gentlemen, I announced to the room, a grim smile on my face. An unexpected development. The antagonist wishes to negotiate the terms of her surrender. I have to go. Sam clapped me on the shoulder. Don't let her get in your head, Philip. Remember the mission. The mission is all I have left, I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said in years. When I pulled up to the house, her expensive convertible was parked haphazardly in the driveway. The front door was ajar. I walked in to find her in the living room, a whirlwind of furious energy. Suitcases stood open on the floor, clothes and jewelry spilling out. She was yanking photos off the mantelpiece, pictures of us, of our life together, and tossing them into a cardboard box. She spun around as I entered. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with a self-righteous fury. There you are, she snapped, as if I were the one who had been delinquent. You said you wanted to talk, I said, my voice unnervingly calm. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching a scene from a movie. Talk? Oh, we're past talking, Philip, she declared, her voice ringing with theatrical finality. I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore. I can't live this half-life with you pretending to be content in this museum of mediocrity. She gestured around our living room, the room we had spent 30 years filling with our life, as if it were a pile of garbage. I just nodded slowly. I see. My lack of reaction clearly infuriated her. She wanted a scene. She wanted tears, begging, a dramatic confrontation that would validate her decision. I was refusing to play my part. That's all you have to say? I see, she demanded. I am leaving you, Philip. For Marcus, a man who is alive, who has ambition, who isn't content to just fade away into beige obscurity with his silly little singing group. I heard you the first time, Linda, I said, my voice still quiet, and I think it's for the best. That stopped her cold. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. This was not in her script. The pathetic old-fashioned husband was supposed to fall to his knees. He was supposed to ask what he could do to change, to be better. He was supposed to be devastated. I walked over to one of her suitcases and picked up a silk blouse that had fallen to the floor. I folded it neatly and placed it inside. Here, you don't want this to get wrinkled, I said. She slapped the blouse out of my hand. Stop it. Stop being so calm. Yell at me. Call me names. Do something. Why would I do that? I asked, genuinely curious. You've made your decision. You're choosing a different life, one you believe will make you happier. As someone who once cared for you very deeply, I can only wish you the happiness you truly deserve. The phrase, the happiness you truly deserve, hung in the air between us, weighted with a meaning she couldn't yet grasp. Her anger began to curdle into confusion. My placidity was a wall she couldn't scale, a language she didn't understand. She had built her identity in opposition to me, to my perceived weakness. My refusal to be weak, to be broken, was robbing her of her entire narrative. She tried a different tactic, cruelty. Fine, she sneered. Be a saint. See if I care. While you're here arranging your sheet music, I'll be at the governor's mansion with Marcus. While you're singing to a bunch of geriatrics, I'll be on a yacht in the Mediterranean. He's going to win this election, and we're going to the top. And you'll be right here, exactly where you are now, alone. Perhaps, I said. I looked around the room, at the empty spaces on the mantelpiece. It didn't look sad. It looked clean, uncluttered. But I won't be in a loveless marriage. I won't be with someone who holds me in contempt. So in a way, I think I'm the one who's going to the top. Her face twisted in a mask of pure frustration. She had exhausted her arsenal. The scorn, the pity, the dramatic pronouncements, none of it had landed. She was firing cannons at a fog bank. I hate you, she finally whispered, the words small and impotent. I know, I said, and I did. I had known for a very long time. Do you need help with your bags? She just stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face for the man she thought she knew, the man she could control. He wasn't there. She saw a stranger, a calm, polite man holding the door open for her to leave his life. Defeated, she snapped her suitcases shut, grabbed her purse and stormed past me without another word. I watched from the doorway as she threw her bags into her car, her movements jerky and angry. She gunned the engine and peeled out of the driveway, leaving a strip of rubber on the pavement like a final furious exclamation point. I stood there for a minute in the sudden profound silence of the house. The air felt lighter. The power shift was complete. Her leaving wasn't her victory. It was my final strategic move before the checkmate. She had walked off the board thinking she had won the game, not realizing she had just cleared the way for the king to be taken. I closed the door, locked it, and went to put on my bow tie. I had a show to get to. The Grand Civic Auditorium was a cathedral of local politics, soaring ceilings, velvet seats, and a stage flanked by 2 enormous digital screens. It was packed. The air buzzed with the self-important chatter of the city's elite, donors in expensive suits, local celebrities, and party loyalists, all there to witness the coronation of their golden boy, Marcus Thorne. I found Gus and Sam in our assigned seats, 10th row, center aisle. Walter was already in position, parked a block away in a nondescript panel van that he'd bought at a surplus auction. The van was a marvel of Gus's engineering, a mobile command center packed with enough processing power and signal-bouncing gear to wage a small cyber war. Walter was our god in the machine. All systems are green, Gus murmured to me as I sat down, his eyes scanning the crowd. Walter has control of the AV feed. He's nested inside their system like a tick on a dog. They have no idea he's there. Sam, looking dapper and entirely innocuous, handed me a program. Linda just arrived. Front row right next to Thorne's campaign manager. She's positively beaming. Looks like she got over her little tantrum. I glanced towards the front, and there she was. Resplendent in her red dress, a radiant smile plastered on her face. She was playing the part of the devoted partner to perfection, laughing at something the campaign manager said, her hand resting possessively on the empty chair beside her, reserved for the man of the hour. She looked happy, triumphant. She had shed her old life, her boring husband, and was now exactly where she believed she belonged. Our eyes met for a brief second across the crowded room. She gave me a tiny, pitying smile, a final acknowledgement of the gulf she perceived between our worlds, before turning away. That was fine. The view would be much better from where I was sitting anyway. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. The campaign manager went to the podium and delivered a gushing introduction, painting Marcus Thorne as a modern-day Cincinnatus, a selfless servant of the people. Then, to thunderous applause, Thorne himself walked onto the stage. He looked a little tired, the strain of the day showing around his eyes, but the spotlight seemed to rejuvenate him. He soaked in the applause, waving to the crowd, his familiar predatory smile firmly in place. He looked towards Linda, who blew him a small kiss. He was on top of the world. He began his speech. It was the usual mix of empty platitudes and soaring rhetoric. He spoke of integrity, of fighting for the little guy, of ushering in a new era of transparency and honesty for our great city. The hypocrisy was so thick it was almost suffocating. I could feel Gus vibrating with suppressed rage beside me. "Patience," I whispered to him. "Let him build the pedestal higher. The fall will be that much greater." Thorne hit his stride, his voice booming through the auditorium. "The days of backroom deals and shadowy interests are over," he declared, jabbing a finger in the air. "My administration will be a beacon of public trust. I promise you a government that is open, accountable, and transparent in all its dealings." That was the cue. "Now, Walter," I breathed into the tiny microphone pinned to my lapel. On the two giant screens flanking the stage, Thorne's handsome, earnest face vanished. It was replaced by a split-screen image. On the left, a crystal-clear, high-resolution scan of a bank statement from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, showing a deposit of $250,000. On the right, a perfectly focused photo, taken from Gus's flower cam, of Thorne in a private restaurant booth, shaking hands with the developer, Peterson, over a thick manila envelope. A wave of confusion rippled through the audience. People murmured, pointing at the screens. Thorne, blinded by the stage lights, hadn't noticed yet. He plowed ahead. "I promise you honesty. I promise you integrity." The image on the screens changed. Now it was an audio file, visualized as a pulsing waveform, with subtitles appearing in large white letters underneath. It was Thorne's voice, captured by the flower cam. "Don't worry about the zoning board, Bill," the subtitles read. "They'll do what I tell them to do. The usual contribution to the re-election fund is all it will take. Just make sure it goes through the usual channels." A collective gasp went through the room. This time Thorne heard it. He faltered, his words trailing off. He glanced over his shoulder at the screens, and he froze. The blood drained from his face. The confident smile evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of pure horror. He stood there, paralyzed in the spotlight, as the evidence of his crimes played out for the world to see. Next came a series of slides. More bank records, more incriminating photos with shady businessmen, transcripts of text messages discussing kickbacks. It was our entire dossier, weaponized and delivered with surgical precision. The murmur in the crowd grew into a roar of shock and anger. The flashes of press cameras began to strobe like lightning. But I wasn't watching Thorne. I was watching Linda. I saw the exact moment her world ended. Her triumphant smile had already faded to a confused frown when the screens first changed. As the bank statement appeared, her frown deepened. When the audio began to play, her face went utterly blank with disbelief. And then, as the full weight of it all came crashing down, her expression crumbled. The pride, the arrogance, the smug satisfaction, it all dissolved, replaced by a raw, naked horror. Her skin seemed to gray under the stage lights. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. This was a catastrophe she could not comprehend. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her man of the future, her ticket to a better life, was being immolated before her very eyes. And then her head slowly turned, her eyes scanning the crowd, desperately searching for, what? An explanation? An escape? Her gaze swept past me at first, then snapped back. Our eyes locked, and in that instant she knew. The pitying smile she had given me just minutes before was gone. In its place was a look of dawning, sickening understanding. She saw me, sitting there in my ridiculous Quartet blazer. She saw Gus beside me, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. She saw Sam, who gave her a polite, almost imperceptible nod. She looked at the three of us, then back at the screens displaying the ruins of her new life, then back at me, and the final piece clicked into place in her mind. The old-fashioned husband, the silly little singing group, the pathetic, harmless relic she had cast aside. It was me. It had been me all along. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held her gaze, my expression perfectly neutral. I gave her the same small, simple nod I had given her in our living room. I wish you all the happiness you deserve. She understood now what that meant. A single tear traced a path through her perfect makeup. Her entire world, built on a foundation of lies and arrogance, had been brought down by the man she thought was too irrelevant to even matter. She had mistaken my patience for weakness. She had mistaken my silence for surrender. She had mistaken my barbershop quartet for a hobby. I stood up. Gus and Sam rose with me. Our work here was done. We turned our backs on the chaos, on the shouting reporters, on the imploding life of Marcus Thorne, and on the shattered woman in the front row. We walked up the aisle, three old men in matching blazers, melting back into the crowd. We didn't need to see the end. We had written it. The quietest melodies, it turns out, can have the most explosive finales. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Marcus Thorne didn't even make it out of the auditorium before the first reporters were screaming questions about federal indictments. His political career wasn't just over, it was a crater, a smoking testament to his own greed. Within a week he was arrested, and the U.S. Attorney's Office announced a sweeping investigation into corruption at City Hall that ended up netting half a dozen other officials. Thorne, facing a mountain of undeniable evidence, took a plea deal. He's currently serving a 7 to 10-year sentence in a federal correctional institution. Not quite the governor's mansion he and Linda had envisioned. And Linda, poor Linda, her name was splashed across every headline, inextricably linked to the scandal. She was the mistress, the other woman, a central figure in the city's most humiliating political implosion. The high society friends who had once fawned over her now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah, a social leper. The glittering world she had betrayed me for had slammed its doors in her face, leaving her alone in the cold. She tried to contact me, of course. The first few days, it was a barrage of furious, incoherent texts. How could you? You ruined my life. You're a monster. I never replied. I had already blocked her number. Then came the emails, each one more desperate than the last. They shifted in tone from anger to pleading. Philip, please. We need to talk. I made a terrible mistake. I was a fool. I miss you. I archived them all, unread. What was there to say? She didn't miss me. She missed the comfortable life she had thrown away, the safety net she thought would always be there. She missed my forgiveness, which she had treated like an infinite resource. But she had finally found the bottom of that well. I filed for divorce the day after the speech. Our assets were frozen pending Thorne's legal proceedings, but the house was in my name alone, a detail from an old inheritance that she had overlooked in her haste to entangle her finances with a man of real wealth. Her lawyer tried to fight it, but it was hopeless. In the end, she walked away with her clothes, her car, and a share of our joint savings that was quickly devoured by her legal fees. The last I heard, she had moved back in with her sister in a different state, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. So here I am, sitting in my quiet living room. The mantelpiece is still bare. I haven't decided what to put there yet. For the first time in a long time, the future feels like an empty page, not a book that's already been written. Gus's son, David, used the small business relief funds that became available after the corruption scandal to open a new cafe. The Harmonics are his most regular customers. We meet there for coffee now, before our Tuesday rehearsals. We're working on a new arrangement of Keep the Home Fires Burning. It feels appropriate. I'm speaking to you now because my story, in one way or another, is a familiar one. Maybe it wasn't a cheating spouse or a corrupt politician. Maybe it was a boss who took credit for your work, a family member who took your kindness for weakness, a world that told you that your passions were silly, that your time was over. We all have moments when we feel underestimated, when our quiet decency is mistaken for a lack of strength. And people will ask, was what I did right? Was it proportional? It's a fair question. It wasn't about revenge until it was, but it was never just about revenge. It was about justice for Gus's son. It was about holding a corrupt man accountable. And yes, it was about reclaiming the dignity that had been stripped from me, piece by piece, over years of quiet condescension. It was about proving, if only to myself, that old-fashioned values, loyalty, patience, precision, and a commitment to one's craft, whether that's logistics or four-part harmony, are not weaknesses. They are a form of power that the loud, flashy world often forgets exists. They thought my life was a joke, but I was the one who wrote the punchline. They mistook my silence for absence, but I was just taking careful aim. Never ever underestimate the quiet ones. The world is full of noise, but the most dangerous things happen in the stillness. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have sought revenge, or would you have just walked away? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I read them all, and if you found some satisfaction in watching the tables turn, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories. Sometimes, the best songs are the ones about getting even.